Alright everybody, so back with another video on the Integra, and it's actually been a few weeks since I've kind of recorded everything. I had a lot going on at my house and redoing my driveway right now, so it's kind of occupied my time a little bit, but I have been doing some stuff on the Integra that I'm going to go over here in a second. I just didn't quite get it all on camera, but basically I was having a hard time getting it started. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the last video, if I powered on the fuel pump manually, I could get it to crank over, or I can get it to, turn on for a second. But other than that, I would just crank over, turn on for a second, and then nothing. And, I did install the fuel rail, which I'll show you guys in a second. It had the fuel pressure sensor, or the gauge, and so I did see that I was able to get fuel pressure when I manually turned it on, but with the key ignition, I couldn't get the fuel pressure to turn on. And I had wired everything up correctly at the, ECU, and still nothing. So, and also I noticed I didn't have any crank signal because I had gotten K-Pro and I plugged into the laptop and I could see there was no crank signal. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting rid of the eBay engine harness and getting rid of the eBay adapter harness, and I went ahead and ordered a Rywire harness, an adapter harness. And what was nice about that was the adapter harness, they had an option for a VSS sensor, which, as you guys know, I have an Accord 5-speed transmission, so I was able to specifically get an adapter harness, or an engine harness, sorry, that had a VSS. And then I was able to select a 2001 Integra for my chassis adapter. So I don't know if the wiring is a little different, or for an 01 or what, but the eBay harness was not working for me. And I installed that harness and the car fired right up. So I knew I could tell right then and there that I obviously thought there was something wrong with the harness that I had, and the Rywire harness fired right up. Also, we'll have to say that Rywire's customer service, as far as emailing them and getting responses back, because I did have a few questions, they were spot on. They emailed me back several times a day. Well, it was only over the course of one day, but they did email me back several times that day until my problem was resolved. As of right now, there are still some things that I need to button up on the car, but it does run and drive. I did drive it around the parking lot. I didn't get it on camera, but I did drive it around the parking lot, and it does run and drive. It's still very loud because it is an open header vehicle right now, and I do have an exhaust that just came in for it. I have a PLM header specific for a K20 swapped Integra, and there's a couple other things that I'm going to get ready to start putting on the car and finishing it up. I do have an appointment with some body guys to get the car, the paint touched up, and I have 2 days before it needs to go to that shop. So my plan is to at least try and get the exhaust on, get a lot of the stuff buttoned up, get the interior buttoned up, so that way I can bring it over there and it will be, more or less done when it comes out of the body shop. But that's where we're at with the car, and I'll go ahead and go over some of the stuff that I got done on it in the past couple weeks. Now, one thing I forgot to mention earlier was I actually pulled the original engine that I had in here out, the K20A, the JDM base model RSX engine, and I put this engine in. This is the K20A3 that came out of the wrecked RSX that I bought a couple weeks ago. And it's kind of a long story as to why that happened, but basically, in the process of me cranking this car over so much before I swapped out the harness and before I figured out why it wasn't running, it seized on me. The JDM K20 seized on me, and it wouldn't turn over by hand. It wouldn't turn over with the key, so I thought the engine was probably bad. or I thought there was something wrong with the engine. It was a used engine that I got off OfferUp. And so I was like, okay, maybe something's wrong with the engine. It was used, not a big deal. Pulled it out, swapped everything over from that engine to this one, and put it back in. And then shortly after, I discovered that there was actually nothing wrong with this engine. And what I discovered was the problem lies with this cheap eBay flywheel that I got. This was a eBay $60 clutch pressure plate flywheel kit all in one. And what happened was a few teeth broke off this flywheel for whatever reason, and they were pinned up in the gear for the starter motor. And the starter motor was pinned against the flywheel because those broken off teeth were kind of all mangled up in there, and it wouldn't allow the engine to turn over even by hand. Now, of course, I didn't discover this till I pulled the starter off a little, after separating the engine and putting it in there. I didn't even think to pull the starter off. Well, it turns out this engine was fine, but I'm not going to go ahead and put this engine back in the Integra because it's really just the same engine. They're both base model RSX engines, and I don't want to go through all the hassle of pulling it out. If it was an Integra Type R engine, I would, but it's just a base model. So to me, it's just having a backup engine. And you can see I have a bunch of accessories over here that I, don't need, and I'm going to end up putting most of this stuff back on the engine. And a couple other things, you can see that the fuel rail is on, and I have the gauge, and fortunately is the other direction because there was really no way to put this rail on this car and have the gauge face the front. But it does work, it does read right. It's upside down, but it does read right. And so the fuel rail is now a return system. And a couple other things to note. I do have a master on here, and the master I ended up going with was off a first gen CRV, and I just kind of manipulated this line here so that it would go up and the port is on top, so it would kind of go up and fit inside this port there. And then the other one I just had to manipulate a little bit so that it goes into this port up here, and it works out just fine. They're already bled, they work just fine, they feel normal. And so the braking system on this car, at least for now, is completely done. And this is the Rywire harness and everything, and it worked out beautifully. It fit up a lot better. The plugs seem nicer. It was considerably more money, but it really was a worthy investment in my mind. And I do have the headlights wired in, or I don't really, they're just plugged in. These extra wires are for the halos, so I need to wire those in, but I'm not going to worry about those for now. As long as I have every light that needs to be on the car to make it legal, I'm happy. This headlight works, this headlight does not work, and I already figured out why. And what's going on is these connectors are no good. The pins are like messed up inside of them. I did run power and ground to these lights. They do come on, and I did back probe these connectors, and I do have power coming to them when I turn the headlights on. So I know it's just the connector. The power and ground is not making it through the connector to the light. So I'm either going to bypass that or try and find some connectors. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. And then this is the fan. And I really found out that this car really does need a fan. Without the fan, it overheats. And with the fan, it sits at about 195. And so this fan is pretty crucial. And I originally wired up the power wire to come from the fan switch signal wire that the adapter harness comes with. But for whatever reason, even though it was 12 volts, it wasn't giving enough amps or something, and the fan would barely spin. So I just hardwired it to the battery. This is actually the ground, even though it's red. And this black wire, it goes inside to a switch on the dash, and the other end of that switch runs to this inline fuse holder straight to the battery. And I think I put like a 5 or 7.5 amp, something small, because you really don't need much more than that. But that's pretty much everything that's different here in the engine bay. The wiring still needs to get tucked up. I did switch this ground out because the other ground sucked. It just, something wasn't fitting right with the crimps. And I have this spare cable laying around, but I am going to switch out the grounds later. I might buy like a ground kit or make some better grounds. But for now, it works. And then also I got a booster line on here. and it's a little overkill, but it does work. It's the original booster line that came off the Integra from this end, and then this end was just some, I think it's like 3/8 air hose or something that I had lying around. But you can see I still have the stock manifold on there. That's one thing I'm going to get done today, is I am going to get the exhaust on. I bought a PLM header and some eBay stainless steel catback Integra exhaust. So I'm hoping that these paired together pretty well, because this was made for a K-swapped Integra to fit your stock exhaust, and this was basically a stock exhaust replica. So it hopefully will work together pretty good, and I shouldn't have to modify it. I also got these side skirts on, and they're on there. They're not going anywhere. So, and I use this bracket because I don't have the factory side skirts, and that's usually what they kind of screw to. So I just used a bracket in the back and a zip tie up front and some 3M tape. And then I got the taillights wired in. I actually had to find somebody parting out an Integra to get taillight harnesses, because this car did not come with taillight harnesses when I bought it. So I got taillight harnesses, and they all work. And so that part is legal. And I did get another bolt up here. So now it's 2 bolts on either side for the wing. And it's sticking up a little bit in the front there because the bolt is like here and here. But this car is going to the body shop, and they're pretty good with this kind of stuff. So I'm just going to have them mess around with that. One thing I do plan on having them do is I'm going to have all these holes filled in. All those holes are going to be body filled, and this hole is going to be body filled. The rear sprayer hole is going to be body filled, and then they're going to body fill all this stuff here. And another thing to note here is, in order to make the gauge work on your instrument cluster, you're going to need to get a B series or a K-swap, you know, Integra or Civic specific coolant temp sensor. And this will, the wire from your adapter harness or your engine harness, in this case there's one on each, is going to plug into here, and then this is going to thread into right here. Now this water inlet outlet piece does not have anywhere to thread it into because it's from the JDM engine, and the JDM engine did not have a sensor there. So I actually have to swap that entire piece out for the non-JDM one, which I have right here. And you can see on this one, it has a sensor here. And I think it was like an idle air control valve or something similar to it. And I'll take that out and I'll thread this piece in, and then thread this into this adapter piece, and then that'll work just fine. So I'm gonna have to swap this piece back over to the engine that I have on there. And while I have the coolant drained again, I did actually track down, it was from the same guy that was parting out the Integra. This is the factory B series heater line gate that I need. And what this is going to allow me to do is, when I switch this back and forth using that cable, it's going to allow me to have cold and hot air. So while I have the entire cooling system drained, I'm going to go ahead and get both of these pieces installed at the same time. All right, I'm getting ready to unbox the exhaust and the manifold and kind of show you guys everything that the kit came with. But I figured might as well show you guys what it sounds like with an open header. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard a lot of open header cars before, but you know, you haven't heard this one, so let's go ahead and fire it up. The tune is a little off, so it doesn't like to fire up right away. I still need to figure out the tune. So yeah, excessively loud, too loud to be driving around on the street. So let's go ahead and get that exhaust unboxed and let's get it installed. All right, so I got it all unboxed, and this is the PLM header, and it seems decently thick. It's definitely not super thin. It seems well made. Hopefully it fits up just fine. It has these 4 runners that go into this 4 to 2 to 1 collector here. And what's nice is it does come with an O2 bung. And then the rest of this is just like a stainless steel exhaust, and it looks decent. I don't see anything wrong with it. As long as it fits up the way it's supposed to, then we won't have any issues. And hopefully I don't have to modify it, you know, cut any flanges off, shorten pipes, lengthen pipes, anything like that. But next I'm going to go ahead and get this car onto the lift, and we're going to go from there. It's a little bit harder to get it on the lift now that has the side skirts on because it's so low. I do have to put it on the blocks first. So I'm going to go ahead and back it up, put the blocks out, and then roll it up. So let's get it on the lift and let's get this stuff on. Alright, so I managed to get the header in, and it's a very, very tight fit. It's actually touching in the back against that support bar for the subframe, but I'm not too worried about that since they're both metal, and I don't think it's going to be a big deal, but it does fit and it does clearance to the bottom of the subframe. It definitely was a little bit of a struggle to get in compared to other K-series manifolds I've put in. I'm not sure what the difference was on this one, but I did end up having to take the axle out, and I did remove the oil filter. But other than that, it just kind of slipped in from the bottom. And I'll go ahead and show you guys what it looks like from the bottom. Alright, so as you can see, the header is in, and it's got quite a bit of room to fit the collector on and not be too close, and it's also not too low. It's basically the same height as that oil pan there. I actually think the oil pan's a little bit lower, but you can see right there that it is touching. But it's in there, it's solid. As you can see, I did have to take the axle out, and I did remove the oil filter just because the flange was in the way. But other than that, it just kind of went right in, and I'm very pleased with the fitment on this. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started installing the rest of this exhaust here, and hopefully all this lines up pretty good as well. So I managed to get the rear muffler on, and the tip actually lines up pretty well in this cutout on the bumper. And then this, of course, will sit up here when this pipe is connected. And then there's another hanger right here. So this part of the exhaust lined up really well. The only issue that I'm running into is this piece here is supposed to go right here and connect to the header right there, but as you can see, it's too long, and it actually has the incorrect flange that I need. This is like a 3-inch donut flange, and this is just a regular gasket 3-hole flange. So my plan is to take this piece here to an exhaust shop and have them weld on the correct flange. I drew a line here to indicate to them exactly where I need the flange, and then I'm going to go ahead and measure this out for them so they know exactly what size I need, and then I'll take the donut there as well. That way they have the exact size of the donut that I need, and hopefully they're available to do it today and they have the correct flange in stock, so I can go ahead and get this exhaust completely bolted up. Alright, so as you can see right here, I managed to get this piece connected to the header, and the exhaust is pretty much where it's going to stay for now. I got the header on and the collector and this test pipe here all the way up to the muffler and the tip, and it does not sit evenly in the cutout for the exhaust, but it's as best as I was able to get it. Originally it was touching the bumper, but I managed to kind of move some of the joints around until it wasn't touching the bumper, And it's not perfect, but this is just a temporary exhaust until I turbo the car, because I do plan on running dual tips, and that's why I ended up using this bumper. But for now, this is gonna work. And what I did to get this piece on was I went ahead and cut off the flange, and I cut off about 8 inches so that this piece here would fit. And I just went to like a local auto parts store, and I got this 2.5 inch exhaust clamp, and it kind of just worked out perfectly. And as long as it doesn't leak and it doesn't, you know, wiggle around too much or rattle, then I'm pretty much happy with it. Because the whole goal with this was just make the car quieter so I don't draw a bunch of attention to myself. And I think for that purpose, it's gonna serve me well. And the exhaust bung is right below the opening right here. I did put this heat shield back on. I'm not sure it really serves a purpose, but it did kind of cover the cables a little, and it does cover kind of the hole a little bit that I drilled. So maybe it will keep some heat out of the cabin. I'm not sure. But this is done for now, and I'm happy with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started on the cooling system. All right, so I already drained the coolant, and basically what I need to do is I need to pull this intake off, so that way I can get to the bolts for this water inlet outlet, pull all the hose clamps off, and then swap it over with the one that has the spot for the sensor. And that way I can go ahead and put the coolant temp sensor in so I can have a reading on the dash. And I know I can read it in K-Pro, but it will just make me feel better that I can see it on the dash. And I did go ahead and pick up the O-ring for that water inlet outlet piece. That way I can just, you know, be sure the O-ring's fresh and it doesn't leak. And it was only a couple bucks. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get started pulling this manifold off. That way we can get that piece installed. All right, so as you can see, I went ahead and pulled off the water inlet outlet, and I actually pulled off the entire assembly, the whole hard line that goes to the water inlet outlet, all the way down to this coolant thermostat housing. And the hard line goes back to the heater hose. And the reason I pulled the entire thing off is I noticed that on this water inlet outlet connector piece on the USDM models, it has this extra water line that kind of comes up here and goes back down to the hard line. And the JDM ones do not have that. So if I was just to switch out this piece, it would end up having this extra coolant nipple here. And I'd have to find a way to like block that or something. And I don't really want to have to mess with that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just swap this entire piece in, and then I can run my coolant temp sensor. So I'm going to go ahead and get this installed now, and I'll show you guys what it looks like when it's all done. All right, so I got the intake manifold back on, and everything in the engine bay is reassembled how it's going to be. And this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the different water inlet pipe system. This one has another coolant hose that goes down to the hard line that wasn't there before. But you know, it was easier for me just to put this entire setup on and just go with that. And this is the coolant temp sensor. So this adapter threads into the inlet housing or the outlet housing, and then the temp sensor threads right into that, and then the harness actually plugs right into that. And then this is the heater gate that I had set up. This was the factory B series cold hot control, and it looks a little goofy, I'm not gonna lie, just these lines here, but it's gonna work, and that's all that really matters at this point. And it's away from the exhaust. So that's all done, and I shouldn't have to open the cooling system up for a little while, but I'm gonna go ahead and get it fired up for the first time on this new exhaust. All right, gonna go ahead and try and fire it up for the first time. I was kind of just messing around on K-Pro trying to get everything kind of dialed in a little bit more with that. But now I'm gonna go ahead and try and fire it up. And my batteries. All right, finally time to drive this thing on the road for the first time ever. I've never driven this car once, even when it was B-Series on the road. So long time coming, and I'm pretty excited. I still don't have a coolant temp sensor gauge. Not sure why. I'll have to look at that later. But I can see here that it's not overheating. I'm running at 195, which is perfectly fine. So here we go. All right, well, the first drive went pretty good. When I first drove it, it was actually in like limp mode, and it had no power at all. It wouldn't go above 2,000 RPMs. And K-Pro said it had two codes, one for the cam position sensor and one for the top dead center sensor. And what I did is I just flipped those two plugs to see if it made a difference, and the check engine lights went away and it was out of limp mode. Another thing that it also does is it idle surges, so the RPMs keep going up and down, and I'll have to address that later because right now I'm at the body shop and I'm getting ready to drop it off. But yeah, overall I'm pretty pleased. It was the first time I ever drove this car on the street, and it went really well, and I'm looking forward to getting it back from the body shop. Anyway, that's gonna wrap it up for this video, guys, and I will see you guys next time.